So today, we're really going to unpack a figure who sits at this just absolute intersection of constitutional law, ruthless commerce, and, well, decades of societal controversy. Larry Flynt.
Mm.
The sources you provided, and it's a real mix of biographical articles, legal summaries, political commentary, they trace a path that is, frankly, difficult to reconcile.
It really is.
How does one man go from, profound rural poverty to becoming a publishing millionaire who, at the same time, becomes the nation's most controversial defender of the First Amendment?
It's a narrative that is just defined by extremes. Larry Claxton Flynt Jr., who lived from 1942 to 2021, was the force behind Larry Flynt Publications, or LFP.
Known everywhere for Hustler magazine.
Exactly. But his legacy is just inseparable from his role as an activist. I mean, he was engaged in this continuous high-stakes legal warfare over free speech, a fight that tragically cost him his mobility.
Right. He was partially paralyzed in 1978 after a targeted assassination attempt.
A targeted attempt, yes.
So that's our central task in this examination. We really need to synthesize the tension in his life. The man who fought tirelessly for civil liberties, but often through publications that many people saw as deeply misogynistic, even dangerous.
And that's the essential paradox the sources present right away. On one hand, you have him recognized in his own industry. He was listed as #1 on Arena Magazine's 50 Powerful People in Porn list in 2003.
Okay.
But on the other hand, he's this indispensable figure in constitutional history. He's recognized for that seminal Supreme Court victory, Hustler Magazine v. Falwell.
A ruling that really shaped the legal definition of political satire.
Profoundly. His life was so dramatic that it was, of course, the subject of that 1996 film, The People vs. Larry Flynt, which really tried to capture the scale of it all.
Okay, let's unpack this and maybe start at the very beginning. Flynt's early life wasn't just poor. It was marked by this extreme instability that seems to have set the stage for the hustle that would define him.
Oh, absolutely. The conditions of his childhood, they're just fundamental to understanding his personality and that later anti-establishment stance. He was born in Lakeville, Kentucky in 1942, Magoffin County.
And that area was known for extreme poverty, wasn't it?
The sources cite it as the poorest county in the nation during the Great Depression. So we're not just talking about a rough upbringing. This was a struggle for, a basic survival in one of America's most depressed regions.
His family life was volatile, even before a real tragedy struck. His father was a sharecropper, served in World War II. So for those first few years, Flynt was raised by his mother and his grandmother.
Right, and then in 1951, his younger sister, Judy, died of leukemia. She was only 4 years old.
That's just heartbreaking.
An immense loss. And it directly preceded his parents' divorce just 1 year later. After the split, his paths really diverged from his brothers. Flynt went with his mother to Indiana, while his brother Jimmy stayed in Kentucky with their grandmother.
And that instability seems to have bred this intense self-reliance in him from a very early age. He actually went back to Magoffin County a couple of years later to live with his father.
Apparently because he just couldn't stand his mother's new boyfriend. And then he dropped out of high school after only the 9th grade. He just decided to reject that traditional path entirely.
And that's when the hustle, as you put it, really began.
In earnest. At just 15 years old, he runs away from home and manages to join the U.S. Army.
How?
With a counterfeit birth certificate. I mean, that acts alone, joining the military underage through pure deception, it speaks volumes about his confidence, his willingness to skirt the rules to get what he wanted.
And during his service, the sources say he got really into poker.
Right, which just reinforces that underlying risk-taking mindset that would drive all of his business decisions later on.
He got an honorable discharge, but finding his footing in civilian life was difficult. He worked for a little while at a General Motors affiliate, Inland Manufacturing, but was laid off after just 3 months.
A union-led slowdown.
Oh.
So the traditional, industrial world had failed him. And this failure pushed him toward outright illegal activity.
He went back to Kentucky and became a bootlegger.
For a brief period, yes. A direct, dangerous way to make money outside the mainstream economy. But that didn't last long. He found out the local deputies were looking for him. He lived on his savings for a couple of months. And then, I think recognizing he needed some structure, he enlisted again.
This time in the U.S. Navy, in July 1960, he served as a radar operator on the USS Enterprise. And this is where you find this. Just bizarre historical footnote.
It's incredible.
The sources confirm he was the operator on duty when the ship recovered John Glenn's space capsule in 1964.
So the future adult publishing magnate was right there, involved in this moment of pure, legitimate American historical achievement. It just speaks to the unpredictable nature of his early life.
He was honorably discharged again in July 1964, and he used his military savings to make his first big, legitimate business move in Ohio.
That's right. In early 1965, he took $1,800, which, adjusted for inflation is about $17,000 today, and he bought his mother's bar in Dayton, Ohio, the Kiwi.
And this modest investment took off almost immediately.
He had a real genius for business, even then. He refitted the bar and was soon making about $1,000 a week.
Which is about $9,300 in today's money.
A huge amount. And the sources emphasize he poured every penny of those profits back into expansion. He bought 2 more bars. The work ethic during this period was just staggering. He was working up to 20 hours a day.
And using amphetamines to stay awake?
He had to. And this expansion accelerated even further with a big innovation. He wanted to move beyond the traditional bar scene.
So he opened what he called a higher-class bar.
The first in the area to feature nude hostess dancers. He called it the Hustler Club, and it opened in 1968. That was the birth of the brand.
And he was very effective at scaling this model, with help from his brother Jimmy and his future wife, Althea Leisure.
Incredibly effective. By 1970, they were running 8 profitable Hustler Clubs across Ohio, Cincinnati, Toledo, Cleveland. The revenue was significant. Each club was pulling in between $250,000 and $500,000 a year.
But the big pivot, the one that launched the magazine, it wasn't driven by success, but by financial panic. He started the Hustler newsletter in January 1972.
Right, and it was just a simple 2-page black and white ad for his clubs at first. But it got popular very quickly. It grew to 32 pages by the next year.
Then the external economic climate just changed everything.
The 1973 oil crisis. It triggered a massive recession, and spending on leisure just plummeted.
Yeah.
Club revenues dropped, and Flynt was facing a real financial crisis. Bankruptcy was a very real possibility unless he could find a new, massive revenue stream.
His solution was audacious, even ruthless.
It was. He leveraged debt and tax obligations to fund the new venture. The sources note he consciously deferred paying the sales taxes his clubs owed, a huge gamble that put him at odds with the state, just to raise the capital he needed to turn that newsletter into a national, sexually explicit magazine.
It was a high-risk move, financial freedom or total ruin.
Exactly. And this transition leads us squarely into the next phase.
Yeah.
The highly controversial rise of Hustler magazine and the devastating violence that followed.
The first national issue of Hustler came out in July 1974, and it wasn't an immediate hit.
No, for the first year it really struggled, largely because it was deliberately more explicit than its big rivals like Playboy or Penthouse.
And that made distributors wary.
Very wary. They were reluctant or sometimes just outright refused to stock it. The magazine was designed to aggressively target a different demographic. Working-class men who Flynt felt were ignored by those more polished lifestyle magazines. Hustler was raw. It was often crude.
It cemented his reputation for explicitness in November '74 when it published what the sources call the first pink shots.
Yes, very explicit photos. And Flynt was constantly battling distributors who were threatening to pull the magazine from shelves over its content.
But the magazine's big break, the moment it became a national financial powerhouse, came from a singular, shocking journalistic coup.
That defining moment was in 1975. Flynt bought paparazzi photos of former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis.
Photos taken during a vacation in 1971 showing her sunbathing nude.
Yes, he paid $18,000 for them, which today is about $98,000, a massive sum.
And the August 1975 issue with those photos was a sensation. It sold 1 million copies in just a few days.
That's what catapulted Hustler's national profile. It secured Flynt's millionaire status, and crucially, it allowed him to pay off all those back taxes he deferred to launch the magazine in the first place. Circulation eventually peaked at around 3 million.
And with that financial stability came formalization. In 1976, Larry Flynt Publications, LFP, was created.
A privately held company. And it soon diversified, controlling its own distribution, later branching into films, casinos. He became a major, if highly specialized, media mogul. But just 2 years after forming LFP, everything changed.
And we have to approach this next part with the seriousness it demands. On March 6, 1978, Flynt was in Lawrenceville, Georgia. He was involved in another obscenity legal battle
in Gwinnett County. And while he was standing on the sidewalk with his local attorney, Gene Reeves Jr., they were both shot by an unseen sniper.
The consequences were devastating and permanent for Flynt.
Absolutely. The attack left him partially paralyzed, irreversible spinal cord damage. He was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He often used that extravagant, gold-plated wheelchair almost as a symbol of his defiance.
His attorney, Gene Reeves Jr., was injured, but thankfully recovered completely.
He did.
Identifying the perpetrator reveals a motive that is just rooted in extreme racial hatred.
The assailant was Joseph Paul Franklin, a notorious militant white supremacist and serial killer who was active between 1977 and 1980. His targets were primarily black and Jewish people.
And Franklin confessed years later, tying the attack directly to the content in Hustler.
He did. He said he was enraged by an interracial photo shoot in the magazine. He detailed his vile motivation, saying, "I saw that interracial couple having sex. It just made me sick. I threw the magazine down and thought, I'm going to kill that guy."
So this wasn't just an attack on Flynt, it was an act of domestic terrorism.
It was, aimed at punishing someone for promoting interracial relationships through free expression.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because it reveals Flynt's own paranoia and his deep distrust of the system he was fighting. He didn't believe it was just a lone wolf.
No, he publicly suggested it was a larger conspiracy. He pointed to, ultra-right-wing elements around U.S. Representative Larry McDonald, and he even implied connections to the intelligence community, theorizing Franklin might have been some kind of MKUltra-style mind control victim.
And despite the confession, Franklin was never actually tried for the attack on Flynt.
No, never. He was charged with 8 unrelated murders in Missouri and sentenced to death. And this created a profound moral paradox for Flynt, the victim. He was a staunch opponent of capital punishment.
He publicly stated he did not want Franklin executed.
He did. He believed it was wrong, regardless of the crime committed against him, which is an astonishing stance to take against the man who permanently altered your life.
It truly is. Yet, despite Flynt's opposition, Joseph Paul Franklin was executed by lethal injection on November 20, 2013.
That attack, the paralysis, and his refusal to demand vengeance, it really cemented his identity as this figure defined by constitutional principle, even when that principle applied to his own attempted killer. It galvanized him, pushed him away from managing the clubs, and squarely into the legal arena for the rest of his life.
So let's talk about that legal battlefield now, starting with his first big confrontation with the law over obscenity.
That would be the famous Cincinnati trial in 1976. He was prosecuted on obscenity and organized crime charges by Simon Lease, a local prosecutor known for his anti-pornography activism.
And he was hit with a severe sentence initially, 7 to 25 years in prison.
But he only served 6 days. The sentence was quickly overturned on appeal.
Why?
Significant allegations of judicial, jury, and prosecutorial bias and misconduct during the trial. The case itself was so legally notable that an argument from it eventually reached the Supreme Court in 1981 as Larry Flynt v. Ohio.
And the really wild coda is that in the 1996 film about his life, Flynt himself made a cameo playing the judge who originally sentenced him.
It's incredible. And his legal notoriety quickly went beyond obscenity into procedural law. We have to talk about Keaton v. Hustler magazine. It's a case that's still a critical part of the first-year law school curriculum.
Okay, break that down for us. This involved Kathy Keaton, who is the girlfriend of his rival publisher, Bob Guccione of Penthouse.
Correct. She filed a libel suit against Hustler over a derogatory cartoon published in 1976. Her first suit, in Ohio, was thrown out because she missed the deadline, the statute of limitations.
So this is where the legal maneuvering comes in.
Exactly. Keaton refiled the lawsuit in New Hampshire, a state known for its very long statute of limitations. But the key detail is that Hustler sales in New Hampshire were minimal. So the core legal question that ended up at the Supreme Court in 1983 was, can you be forced to defend a lawsuit in a state where your business activity is negligible?
It's a question of personal jurisdiction.
That's the legal term. Flynt argued that a few sales didn't constitute enough minimum contacts for New Hampshire to have power over LFP, but he lost. The Supreme Court ruled that even if you only sell a small number of copies in a state, the act of distributing your material there is enough contact to allow a lawsuit to proceed.
And that's a huge deal for media companies, even today.
A massive deal. It made it much easier to sue a magazine anywhere it was sold.
It was during those Keaton proceedings at the Supreme Court in 1983 that his courtroom antics really boiled over.
They did. The sources describe him shouting a profane insult at the justices, calling them 9 assholes in one token, which was a reference to Justice Sandra Day O'Connor.
Chief Justice Warren Burger had him arrested for contempt of court right there.
He did, though the charge was later dismissed.
Yeah.
But it shows that Flynt wasn't just fighting legal battles. He was engaging in a kind of performance art aimed at maximizing provocation and challenging the very decorum of the federal judiciary.
His confrontation with the government continued that same year with the John DeLorean case.
Yes, in 1983, Flynt got his hands on an FBI surveillance tape about the DeLorean drug arrest and leaked it to the media. And the content was stunning, reportedly showing FBI agents pressuring DeLorean by asking if he'd rather defend himself or have his daughter's head smashed in.
And this defiance led to that spectacular act of protest during his own subsequent trial.
He wore a U.S. flag as a diaper, a highly publicized act that led to a charge of flag desecration and a 6-month jail sentence. He seemed determined to sacrifice his own freedom to make a theatrical political point at every turn.
But the culmination of all this, his biggest legal victory, was the 1988 Supreme Court decision, Hustler magazine v. Falwell. This came from a 1983 ad parody targeting the evangelist Reverend Jerry Falwell.
The parody was fictional and deeply offensive. It suggested Falwell's first sexual encounter was incestuous and happened in an outhouse. Now, crucially, Falwell couldn't sue for libel because the ad clearly said it was a parody not to be taken seriously.
So he sues for something else.
He sued for intentional infliction of emotional distress, or IIE. And that's the key. Libel requires proving a false statement of fact. IIE focuses on the conduct. Was the speech so outrageous it caused severe emotional harm?
And if the court had sided with Falwell, it would have created a massive loophole.
A huge one. Any public figure could shut down offensive satire just by claiming emotional damage. By winning, Flynt secured a massive victory for free speech. The ruling clarified that public figures cannot recover damages for IID based on parodies or political commentary. It's a foundational protection for critics and satirists.
And the postscript to this whole feud is just bizarre.
It's almost unbelievable. After Falwell's death, Flynt revealed that the two of them had developed a complicated friendship over the years. Flynt said that despite their profound differences, he always appreciated Falwell's sincerity.
That's incredible.
It's an almost perfect example of respecting your legal adversary, even if you despise their message.
And his legal fights continued long after that victory. He had corporate battles, more obscenity charges.
Right. 1999, LFP pled guilty to pandering obscenity in Cincinnati and agreed to stop selling adult videos there. He even sued his own nephews in 2009 for producing what he called inferior pornography, using the family name. He won on the trademark issue.
Let's circle back to the dark side of his confrontation with authority. Specifically, his 322-page FBI file, which came out via a Freedom of Information Act request in 2021.
The file details his 1983 Supreme Court disruption, but it includes this astonishing, though unconfirmed, claim from a confidential informant.
What was the claim?
It suggests Flynt approached a mercenary and asked him to rig his wheelchair with C4 explosives. The alleged plan was to detonate the wheelchair during the Supreme Court hearing, potentially killing himself and the justices.
Even if it's unconfirmed, the fact that such an allegation exists in his file, it suggests a level of rage that goes way beyond simple political activism.
It suggests the battle for him was existential, and that it sometimes threatened to cross the line from constitutional defiance into, well, outright violence against the very institutions he was relying upon.
Which sets the stage perfectly for looking at his highly interventionist political activism, a role he played by leveraging scandal and controversy.
Flynt always framed himself as a civil libertarian to the core. And while he was generally a Democrat, his political involvement was always personalized and dramatic. He even briefly ran for president as a Republican in 1984.
That seems like it was just for attention.
Almost certainly. His real political tactic was what you could call the bounty system. He intervened in politics by targeting conservative and Republican politicians, especially during the impeachment of President Bill Clinton in 1998.
He offered $1 million reward for any evidence of extramarital affairs involving high-ranking conservatives.
And he published what he found in the Flynt Report. And this move had real consequences. His publications led directly to the resignation of the incoming House Speaker, Bob Livingston, who stepped down after being confronted with evidence of his own affairs.
So it wasn't just noise. His actions had tangible political results.
And he repeated the tactic multiple times. In 2007 and 2012, he offered a reward for Mitt Romney's unreleased tax returns. Then, in 2017, he upped the stakes dramatically, offering $10 million for evidence that would lead to the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
He also briefly ran for office himself in the 2003 California governor recall election.
He did. He finished 7th out of 135 candidates. He used the campaign to reinforce his identity, calling himself a smut peddler. Who cares?
He also held strong stances on other national issues. He was a vocal critic of the Warren Commission's findings on the Kennedy assassination.
Offering his standard $1 million reward for information leading to the conviction of the real assassin. And on social issues, he was consistently progressive, a strong supporter of LGBT rights and same-sex marriage. He also opposed military adventurism, supporting groups that were against the war in Iraq.
There's one story that really reveals his complex internal moral calculus. It involves former PFC Jessica Lynch.
Yes, the soldier captured and rescued in Iraq. Flynt purchased nude photographs of her. But in a surprising move, he publicly vowed he would never publish them.
Why?
He called her a good kid who was merely a pawn for the government. This suggests that even as someone who profited from scandal, he drew a line when he felt the subject was a political victim rather than, a willing public figure.
That complexity also showed up in his endorsements. In 2013, he endorsed Mark Sanford.
Right. And he justified it based on what he called Sanford's act of bravery in openly embracing his mistress after the scandal. For Flynt, that kind of personal transparency, even in moral failure, was a political virtue.
We should also touch on the most unusual spiritual shift to his life. A brief but intense period of conversion.
Yes, he was married 5 times, but the sources detail this surprising year in 1977 when he said he became an evangelical Christian.
He was converted by the evangelist Ruth Carter Stapleton, President Jimmy Carter's sister.
He claimed he had a vision from God while flying with her in his private jet. It led him to bizarrely vow to hustle for God. He was briefly a born-again Christian.
But that conversion was fleeting.
Very. He later completely rejected it, declaring himself an atheist. He cited an irreconcilable difference in belief. It's another piece of evidence showing the turbulent, contradictory nature of his identity.
Flynt lived in the Hollywood Hills until his death in February 2021 at age 78 from heart failure. The sources also mention he had previously stated he was living with bipolar disorder.
A detail that might offer some context for the profound volatility in his public persona.
And this brings us to the most critical and, frankly, damning part of his legacy. We have to address the serious allegations and critiques concerning misogyny, abuse, and the nature of the content he published. And this material requires real gravity.
It absolutely does.
We have to begin with the deeply painful allegations made by his own daughter, Tanya Flynt Vega. She accused him of sexually abusing her as a child in her 1998 book, Hustled: My Journey from Fear to Faith.
Tanya Flynt Vega's account described her father showing her highly inappropriate images from Hustler, touching her, assaulting her orally, and attempting penetration. She wrote that the attempt caused intense pain. This account, coming from a family member, stands in direct contradiction to his public image as a champion of liberty.
And she alleged an abuse of power that directly undermines his Mr. Free Speech identity.
A chilling allegation. She claimed that when he learned she was going to publish her book, he called her and threatened to have her neck wrung. This suggests a violent intent to suppress her First Amendment rights when they were used against him personally.
What was Flynt's response to these accusations?
A consistent and vehement denial. He publicly stated that anyone who knew him knew his sexual preferences, didn't include children, especially his own. He did, however, acknowledge he'd been an absentee father, and he suggested her claims were motivated by a desire for retribution and attention.
It's a painful conflict that remains an indelible part of his personal history.
It is.
And beyond the family allegations, there's the controversy over the graphic content in Hustler itself. The sources detail that violence against women was a persistent, recurring theme.
This went far beyond general pornography. The focus was often on deliberate degradation and violence. The sources cite specific, deeply disturbing examples. One pictorial was titled "The Naked and the Dead,"
which depicted an imprisoned woman being forcibly shaved, sexually assaulted, raped, and electrocuted.
It's just horrific. Another notorious example was the Dirty Pool pictorial from January 1983, which depicted a gang rape on a pool table.
And this was made even more appalling by a specific real-world tragedy.
Right. Following the actual, highly publicized gang rape of Cheryl Araujo on a pool table in New Bedford, Massachusetts, Flynt created a fake postcard that specifically mocked the victim and the Portuguese community. A deliberate act of mockery, leveraging a real trauma for shock value.
And we can't overlook the long-running Chester the Molester comic.
It ran monthly for 13 years, depicting a character attempting various forms of sexual assault and molestation of girls and women.
And the controversy around that feature just intensified when the artist, Dwayne B. Tinsley, was arrested and convicted in 1990 for molesting his own daughter.
Yes. And though Tinsley's conviction was later overturned on appeal, he served nearly 2 years in prison. And Flynt staunchly defended him, calling him a genius, and continued to publish his work that was drawn while he was incarcerated.
These facts, understandably, led to heavy criticism of the narrative in the 1996 film The People vs. Larry Flynt.
Absolutely. The feminist icon Gloria Steinem publicly criticized the movie for sanitizing the reality of the magazine's content, noting the film completely left out the images of women being beaten, tortured, and raped.
Steinem also highlighted the hypocrisy of Flynt as a free speech protector when he had attacked feminists for using their own First Amendment rights to protest pornography.
Exactly. And critics also pointed out the film's omission of Hustler's racist and anti-Semitic overtones, like a cartoon showing a black man reaching for a watermelon on a giant mousetrap.
What was the director's defense? Milo Forman.
Forman, whose parents were victims of the Nazis, said that including the most extreme content would have made the film impossible to release. His motivation wasn't admiration for Flynt himself, but for the system. He said he made the movie out of admiration for the beauty and wisdom of the American Constitution when provoked by the worst.
So he saw Flynt as the ultimate necessary test case for robust free speech protection.
That's how he framed it. And ultimately, Flynt defended his crude and harmful content with a simple, provocative rationale. His true goal, he claimed, was to offend every single person in this world at some point.
He embraced being the worst to reinforce his constitutional position.
Yes, and that is the core of his paradoxical legacy. He used that negative public perception as his ultimate shield. His most quoted defense of his legal fights really distills his life's work. If the First Amendment will protect a scumbag like me, then it will protect all of you, because I'm the worst.
As we conclude this examination, it is worth just reviewing the scope of his business at the time of his death.
LFP was no longer just a print publisher. It had numerous magazines, the Hustler Video Film Studio. It acquired VCA Pictures in 2003. He opened the Hustler Casino in Gardena in 2000. He was a very diversified businessman.
And he himself predicted the end of the print magazine, didn't he?
In 2014, yes. He saw the competition from the internet coming. He had a keen, if reluctant, understanding of the shifting media landscape.
So what we have really analyzed today is a man who is just defined by these extreme contradictions, a champion of civil liberties who published material others found profoundly dangerous, a seeker of political transparency in others while contending with serious allegations of abuse from his own family.
His life was a continuous, volatile clash between personal freedom and public decency, and it forces us to confront the limitations and the immense power of constitutional protections when they're applied to the most offensive actors. The writer Laura Kipnis offered a fascinating comparison.
To the French satirist Rabelais.
Yes. She called Hustler one of the most class-antagonistic publications in the country, dedicated to violating the proprieties that uphold class distinctions.
Which frames the crudeness as a calculated form of cultural warfare against the elite.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises a really provocative question for you to consider, built right into the structure of his success. Flynt positioned himself as the ultimate rebel, the voice of the common man, using crude material to tear down these perceived class barriers.
Right.
Yet, to protect that offensive publishing empire, he relied entirely on the most elite institutions of power, the U.S. Supreme Court, decades of high-level constitutional lawyers, the very legal systems of the nation. How did he so successfully utilize the systems of power he seemed to despise to ultimately secure the legal protection necessary for his empire to thrive?
It's a fundamental paradox, isn't it? Using the establishment to protect his anti-establishment crusade. That is certainly a powerful thought to mull over concerning the nature of rebellion and the infrastructure that's required to sustain it. Thank you for walking us through the source material on Larry Flynt's tumultuous life and his very complex legacy.
It was a challenging, but I think an absolutely necessary exploration of a figure who tested the limits of American freedom.
Thanks for listening.